Hey guys, Gary J here. I want to talk about the ignition switch on this truck. When I first bought this truck, the first thing I had to do was to repair the ignition switch. And so when I got it from the dealership, I actually had 4 keys. Now one of these keys was made to unlock the door or lock the door. And the other key was made to turn the ignition. So we had 2 different keys. One to unlock the door, and then if you want to crank it up, you have to use a different key to crank it up. So when I got inside the vehicle, you can see the ignition switch here. The first thing that I noticed on the test drive was when I turned this right here, it would not crank up. You have to keep turning it till you get it just right in order for the tumblers to catch and for the vehicle to crank up. So it took 5 or 6 times switching this back and forth to get the ignition switch to actually crank up the vehicle. So I thought, well, I'll have to replace the ignition switch, which the price of the vehicle was not that bad, so I knew that it wouldn't cost me that much. It would, to replace this or fix this problem here. And I called a friend of mine at a locksmith and asked him about it. But I wasn't going to buy this truck because the ignition switch was not working. And the driver's door did not shut all the way very easily because the hinge had worn on it and the little bushings on the hinge. And so that was a problem too. But talking about the ignition switch, a few things that we learned about this was that I talked to the locksmith, and he told me, he said, 90% of the time when you have a truck like this with a few years on it, the key will wear. You see how that key is worn right there? The key will wear a good bit right here, and these edges and corners right here will be filed down because you keep turning ignition, right? He said 70% of the time, if you order a brand new key from GMC and put that key in here, about 70% of the time, if you order a brand new key from GMC and put it in here, it'll crank right up. So that's something good to know. I think these keys don't have electronic chips, so they're probably like $30. So that would be one thing I would recommend. This is a common problem with GMC and Silverados of this generation. So anyway, when the key wears, as you can tell, when the key wears like that, then you got problems. But buying a new key will often correct that problem about 70% of the time. Now, since I had 2 keys, one for the door, and then I had to use a totally different key for the ignition. When I took it to my friend at Dixie Lock and Safe in Thompson, he sent out a young man. And the young man, he took this ignition switch out. Now, it's pretty easy to get all this stuff off right here. Actually, what he did was he grabbed it right here and pulled up on this and pulled down on this, and this whole top piece comes off and this whole bottom piece comes off right here. And when you do that, it exposes your ignition switch. And I think he used a small little tool, kind of like a hex tool, to pop this out and then unplug it. Now what he did that was pretty amazing to me was that if you replace the whole switch, that's probably $125 for another switch. But what he did was he took the ignition switch out, took it inside the shop, and he took my door key. Now, one thing about my door key was that the dealership had bought a brand new GMC door key. It was brand spanking new. And so that door key was perfect. All the other keys have been worn, like this one. So he took the door key, which would not have fit this right here, and he turned the tumblers inside this switch so that the tumblers would fit the door key. So now I would have the door key would now turn the ignition switch, and it was a brand new key. That's the real thing I want you to understand. A brand new GMC door key, and you can turn the tumblers in here. I don't know how he did it, but you can turn the tumblers inside this switch and to fit the door key. And so then when I put the brand new key in here, the door key, and turned it, it cranked up like a brand new truck. No problem whatsoever. And so no more issue with that. So I told him, I said, on the GMC, I said, I'll need a couple of extra keys. So he made me 2 more keys, and they were $6 a piece because they don't have the electronic thing inside of them. So it cost me $12 for 2 extra keys. So now I have 3 keys that fit the ignition switch. Now this is something you have to remember. Now if you're using a brand new GMC key, and that's what you want to do, you get a brand new GMC key for this, in this case, and the keys that you have made, you must make those keys from that brand new key. If you make your extra keys from the worn out one, then you're just going to have 2 worn out new keys, because these edges right here have been worn down over a period of time. So this key is pretty worthless, and so your new keys will be worthless too. So you want to get the brand new key and make your copies from the brand new key. Okay, so that worked fine. And so just to recap that, 70%, number one, 70% of the time, if your ignition here, you're having a problem when you put the key in and you can't get it to crank up, except you got to turn it 5 or 6, 7 times until you fumble with it and it hits just right and cranks up. Go ahead and purchase a brand new key. This ignition switch is about $125, what I understand. So purchase a brand new key, probably for $30 from GMC. And the locksmith can do that for you, because they got to have some numbers or something like that to match up that ignition switch. And 70% of the time, that new key will go in here and crank it up with no problem like a brand new key, because, again, these edges have been worn off over a period of time. And if you have a door key that's different than your ignition key, and you have a new door key, like in my case, you can have the tumblers, take this out and have the tumblers turn to fit that door key. I did not know you could do that. So that was pretty ingenious to me. So now the truck cranks up just like a brand new truck, and that's great. That solved the ignition problem. And then you have your extra keys made from your brand new key, and you won't have any more problem with that. How much did it cost for them to pull out this ignition switch, turn the tumbler so it would fit the door key, which was a brand new GMC key? How much did that cost? $45. $45. That's cheap. And the 2 extra keys cost me an extra $12, $6 a piece. So that's what, $57. So that's a cheap fix for this ignition switch problem. Now there's one other issue with the GMC, and that is the key fob. The locksmith has a $10,000 machine that will program your key fob to your GMC truck. Now, sometimes that doesn't work. I've tried 2 different places with 2 different machines, and they could not program my fob to this truck. And the reason for that is probably because of this. When you take out, this is a brand new radio, when you take out the factory radio, when you take out that factory radio and put a aftermarket radio, sometimes you cannot program the key fob to your vehicle. The radio's got something to do with that programming of the key fob. I have not gone to a GMC dealer yet. I was thinking about doing that, but I've not gone to a GMC dealership to see if they can program the fob to fit this truck or not yet. But I'm going to do that. I do like to use a fob. So that's something to know too. If you can't get somebody to program the fob, it may be because you've got an aftermarket radio. Now I did read where one guy had a fob that he bought and a remote control engine start. You push the button and it cranks up your vehicle. That eliminated his other problem about his key fob. He had an aftermarket radio and he got a self-start key fob to start the engine. And that corrected the problem, and the key fob worked for the doors too. So that's another thing you could do. I don't really need to crank the truck up, with a remote, but that can cure that problem too. So this is just kind of FYI about the ignition system. So, for $57, I fixed the ignition system, and it cranks up great and runs great. No problem at all. This is like a brand new ignition switch now because the tumblers have been changed to fit the door key. And if you have an ignition system and you say, well, my truck cranks up fine when I turn the ignition, it cranks right up. But you've got two different keys. You've got a key for the door and you got a key for the ignition switch, and you just want one key. That's kind of what we do with houses. We buy a lock system where we can use one key on all the locks. Then you might consider having the ignition switch taken out and the tumblers turned so that it'll fit your door key. I think it's going to be easier. I think it is to have the tumblers turned in the ignition switch than trying to change the door tumblers. I don't know, but it seems like to me they took this out. It only took them probably 8 minutes to take out the ignition switch, 10 minutes most. So it's easy to get this out if you know what you're doing. That's the key, know what you're doing. So I just want to share that with you guys, and maybe that'll help you with GMC and Silverado and Avalanche, and others have the same kind of problem, what I understand. So there are other vehicles just like this, but it may save you a little bit of money. And again, I wasn't going to buy this truck because this didn't work, and the door didn't shut all the way, and then that was another issue on the door. But for $45 to fix this problem with a GMC door key and have a key that fits the door and ignition switch was well worth it to me. So just FYI on the GMC, Silverado, and Avalanche and others that are very similar to this particular problem, common problem. Thanks for watching, guys. Gary J.